this new visit of Putin to China showed a very different perspective to all of us, because we haven't seen Xi embracing somebody. You have to have a lot in common with that person to embrace him in terms of security, military, economic, and everything is involved in this new relationship between Russia and China. When it comes to their economy, these two countries, and the changes that we're witnessing right now in the world, how do you find these changes?
I think that the changes are a almost total discontinuity from the world that we came to take for granted as our normal for maybe the past 500 years, and it's been evolving, obviously, and it's been changing shapes, and a certain social and economic structure have grown in refinement and complexity, but essentially it's been the same thing. With the, let's call it the banking cartels in power, shaping the economic system, shaping the economic thought, shaping the political and social systems, and basically engaging with the rest of the world through a system that we could call neo-colonial, or, through history, colonial, imperialistic, neo-colonial. And I think that this is now changing. I think that they have entered into the end game. The transition will take a long time, but it is very clear that Russia and China have embraced not just the symbolic embrace between Xi and Vladimir Putin, but a real embrace, because they understand that they depend on one another. And I think we have to think back 10 years ago that the West has managed to pit Ukraine against Russia and to coerce them to fight their war against Russia by proxy. Let's say that if today somehow the West managed to pull off a regime change coup in Russia and install some new Boris Yeltsin, or some Alexei Navalny type person in the Kremlin. Well, we can't exclude that in the next 10 years, the West would be able to turn Russia against China, by propaganda, by, political intrigues and various schemes. Because we have to remember that 10 years ago, the Ukrainians had no desire, no intention to fight a war against Russia. Even 2 years ago, Ukrainians had no desire and no intention to really fight the war against Russia, except for this far-right neo-Nazi clique that's in power in Kiev. But if that can be done, then there's you don't have to go far in Russia to find a xenophobic sentiment. And then, if the wrong people came into power in Kremlin, then that sentiment would get amplified, and you could have, it's hard to imagine today, but you could have a direct confrontation between Russia and China. So from the Chinese point of view, and I'm convinced that they're very fully aware of all these things, they have to go it all the way. So they cannot take this conflict halfway. They have to finish this occult oligarchy that's in power in the West now. They have to completely disenfranchise them. I think they can't leave the battle half won. And so what that means to me is that the partnership between Russia and China will only be getting stronger and deeper, and it's going to expand on more and more levels. And their partnership in strategic terms against the Western powers is going to have to be driven forward with a purpose. And that purpose will be, as I said, to completely disenfranchise the oligarchy that's in charge in the West. I don't think that conflict is going to continue militarily after Ukraine, probably. But it will continue in legal and diplomatic ways, and through economic pressure.
When you look at China today, are they really prepared to totally and wholeheartedly support Russia and BRICS against the United States. What's at stake for China, in your opinion, in this game between BRICS and the United States?
Oh, I think it's also existential because, even though Russia is today fighting a military war by proxy in Ukraine against combined West, the enemy number one, the designated enemy number one, is still China. So, if the West managed to defeat Russia, they would turn on China, and they might turn on China anyway, even if they lose to Russia in Ukraine. So I think it's existential. China has already lost once to Western powers, and we had then a century of humiliation where, what was an economic superpower in the world for most of history of civilization, has then become one of the poorest the poorest country in the world, and has been absolutely destroyed at the hands of the British colonialists. And so I think that the Chinese leadership understands that this could happen again because, they know their enemy. For that reason, I think that this struggle is existential. From today's point of view, China is again a superpower, but in the same way that they have lost the superpower status from the end of the 18th century and through the 19th century, that could happen again in the future. And I'm convinced that, having been instructed by history, they will not allow this to happen again.
There are a lot of discussions out there. People are discussing why Putin didn't intervene in Ukraine in 2014 when there was a coup. And many people are thinking that Russia was not that powerful. The economy of Russia was not that powerful to take a risk as they took in 2022 to invade Ukraine. How do you find the situation of Russia in 2014? Was Russia capable of intervening the situation in Ukraine and not letting the coup happening in Ukraine?
Well, I think that Russia was capable of intervening militarily, but Russia was still very vulnerable to sanctions from the West. And it seems to me that Vladimir Putin and the government in Kremlin were hesitant, and there was a lot of pressure on Vladimir Putin to intervene. And if you recall, in 2014 and 2015, his popularity took a very, very significant dip. And at the time, the media in Russia was very, very critical, very bitterly critical against Vladimir Putin and the leading politicians from the opposition. And so there was a great deal of pressure. I think that militarily they were capable, but there are two other things. You need to build resistance to Western sanctions. And so I think that maybe Putin and people around him were hesitant about that. Maybe they didn't feel that they could withstand the risk of sanctions from the West, and that they needed to build the alternatives to the SWIFT system and to strengthen their trade relationship with the key trading partners. I think that maybe they also needed to secure the diplomatic and political support, by forging better ties with countries like Iran, like China, India, Saudi Arabia, and other nations, because, invading a neighboring country is a very, very serious step. And it's, in a way, you cross the Rubicon, you cannot go back from there. So I think that they needed to be very sure that they can withstand the fallout, even if it goes according to the worst case scenario. And at the same time, they did try to engage with with Germany, with France, with the new Ukrainian leadership as well, to try to negotiate a peaceful settlement with the Kiev regime through, first there was a Geneva Accords in May 2014. Then they negotiated the Minsk protocols and then Minsk II. And so I think that they wanted to give it every chance of working out a solution peacefully. And at the time, what the Donbas republics, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, they had their independence referendums in June 2014. Well, the Russians were not supportive. They told them, you need to delay this. It's not a good time to be doing this, and they really didn't support their independence bid. They supported them in seeking security guarantees, certain degrees of autonomy, legalization of the Russian language, and so forth, but not full independence. And they had absolutely no intentions of annexing any part of Ukraine at that time, other than Crimea. And so I think that it's very difficult to tell from this distance, because obviously, they didn't give us all of their deliberations, but I can see that A, they may have wanted to preferably resolve the situation peacefully. B, they may have been hesitant about withstanding all the consequences of a military invasion. And C, time gave them the maneuvering space to better prepare in case they needed to resolve the matter by force.
Yeah. We know that when we talk about 2014, that coup in Ukraine, it brings us to this new conflict in Georgia, that we are seeing the same manner of revolution in Georgia. And do you think that Georgia is going the way that Ukraine went, and it ended up to the full destruction of Ukraine?
I very much doubt that, Nima. And the reason why I doubt that is because the people of Georgia have seen what happened to Ukraine. They already had an experience of a military clash with Russia in 2008. And so in April of 2008, we had the famous Bucharest Memorandum, right? Where the NATO held their summit, and then they declared that that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. There was no, it was very categorical. They will be members of NATO. And so that was, at the time, that seemed like a good idea. And then 4 months later, Saakashvili launched an attack on Abkhazia, right? Sorry, on South Ossetia. And then I think that at the time, Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, who was president, Putin was a prime minister then, they were both in China for the opening of the Olympic Games. So this was supposed to be like a surprise attack that would catch the Russians off guard. Well, they weren't off guard. They launched an intervention immediately, and it took them something like 5 days to send the whole Georgian army into a disarray. And so the Georgian people and the Georgian military have felt the power of the Russian interventions and Russian military back then. And that was that was more than 15 years ago now. Russia has only gotten a lot stronger, and its political and diplomatic position in the world is a lot stronger. So this is a very, very bad idea. And I think that, while the Georgian president is fully on board with these neocon plans, much of the rest of the Georgian leaders are not. And so I think that what we see today is a reaction to this Foreign Agents Registration Act equivalent that is being passed. It's going to continue a little while because the president vetoed it, right? So it's still not. But I think that it will happen, and I think that we will not see a southern front opening against Russia in Georgia, because it would be simply mission suicide for Georgia to do this for no gain to them. the only people who stand to gain anything from that are NATO and the Western powers.
Yeah. I think it's so important to evaluate, to assess what has happened to Ukraine since this conflict started in Ukraine. There are many people who are still saying that Ukraine is winning, the West gonna win, NATO gonna do this, gonna do that. But it's so important to consider what has happened to Ukraine so far. When you look at Ukraine today, comparing it with Ukraine 2022, before this conflict started, we have this eastern part of Ukraine that is gone, is officially Russian right now. And the western part of Ukraine is not working because it seems that more than 80% of their GDP was in the eastern part of Ukraine. And we have Russia. We know that it seems that they're gonna capture Odessa and Nikolaev, these cities that are so important for Ukraine, for the existence, for the future of Ukraine. And there are a lot of money coming from the West to Ukraine that if there would be a state called Ukraine in the future would be hugely in debt. And how do you see the situation of Ukraine comparing Ukraine before the conflict and right now what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, I think that Ukraine has been essentially destroyed. In 1991, I think Ukraine had something close to 50 million people. I think at present, the estimates are that we are down to about 28 million people. So pretty much a 40% decline. Many Ukrainians have escaped to the West. Many of them have escaped to Russia. And then a lot of them are caught there in the war zone, and then about 600,000 apparently are casualties, maybe 500,000 of them dead. Ukraine's economy has been absolutely decimated, and it's been decimated already from a very low base, because Ukraine has been between 1991 and 2014. So, at the time of the regime change coup in Ukraine, Ukraine has been the very worst performing economy in the whole world, dead last. It's been only one of 5 economies that have actually had negative GDP growth over that 24-year period. And so the country was already in a very, very deep economic crisis. And then the war only made it worse. And now it would take trillions of dollars of new investment, hundreds of billions, to rebuild Ukraine. Well, that's not going to come from the West. So, whatever is left of rump Ukraine is going to stay a very backwards, poor, impoverished country, probably for generations. At the same time, we see that China's Belt and Road Initiative and these multipolar integrations that are taking place are fully counting on Ukraine to be the bridge between the East and West. And I think that the recent trip by Xi Jinping in Serbia and Hungary probably can be read as a signal that they expect the Russians to take control of Odessa. And the reason why I think so is because if Russia takes control of Odessa, then they will round out completely control of the Black Sea coast of Ukraine. And that means that they will control the outflow of Danube into the Black Sea. And so landlocked nations like Hungary and Serbia and Slovakia as well, who just had their prime minister almost assassinated, they will have an outlet to the sea so they can connect to the maritime commerce around the world, which will make it much, much more difficult for Western powers and European nations to, let's say, blackmail them and to threaten them with sanctions and blockades and things like this. So the fact that Xi Jinping who is the driving force of these multipolar integrations, went to speak with Viktor Orban and Vučić in Serbia, tells us that this is probably what we're going to see happen during this summer and the rest of the year. Even though I'm not sure that we'll see a military conquest of Odessa. I think that Russia will probably find other ways to put pressure on Ukraine and to force them into certain compromises with respect to cities like Kharkov and Odessa, in a way that would allow the Russians to impose political control over those cities and to clean up the junta forces from those cities.
Yeah. You talk about Xi's visit to Europe. It was so fascinating. He went to France, then Serbia and Hungary. And the main visits were to Hungary and Serbia. And these are two important countries when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. They were supporting the idea that this conflict is not working for the West. They have to think a better way to get out of this conflict. But nobody seems to care what they're talking about, because they're not, even in the European Union, there are so much in the hand of the United States. The western part of Europe is much more important for the United States than the eastern part of Europe. And here comes the Xi's visit to Serbia and Hungary, the first time a superpower going there and talking with them. And you don't see the same manner coming from the United States towards Serbia and Hungary. How do you see these pulling and pushing between Russia and China on one side and the United States on the other side in Serbia and Hungary? Do you think that at the end of the day, United States could convince Serbia and Hungary that their future is with the United States, not with China and Russia, or they're not capable anymore to do that?
I think that ship had sailed. You know, there are relatively strong forces in Serbia that are pro-Western, you know, and they're funded, and you know, they still organize their you know, LGBT pride parades and all of these things. And there are many people in Serbia who look up to the West and aspire to, you know, travel to the West and live there and so forth. But I think that to an ordinary person, it's becoming more and more distasteful. First of all, because, you know, when Chinese leaderships talk to the Serb, they come as partners and they speak to them with a certain respect. They are made to feel welcome. Western leaders usually come there to try to coerce, to threaten, to lecture, and they impose these cultural changes that are very, very much at odds with, you know, Serbia is still a relatively patriarchal society. Forcing them to have these, you know, pride parades doesn't sit well with ordinary people. Then there have been incidents with, you know, with the Rio Tinto mining corporation in Serbia, which wanted to force certain gold and copper mines, which were going to, they wanted to force the production in certain very toxic ways that was going to poison the waterways in Serbia, and you know, people who do agriculture were very, very concerned that this was going to be destroying their fields for a very long time. And so these clashes between Serbian people and Western interests have been already eating away at this support for the West. And you know, at least from what we can see so far, the Russian and Chinese side is not putting pressure in this sense. You know, they're not telling them you have to do like we say. They're saying, you know, join our side, join the Eurasian trade unions and multipolar integrations, and you know, we're going to be making big investments here, and we're going to be partners in trade. And so this, I think, probably feels a lot more attractive at this time than the Western offer, which is generally, stick, you do as we say, or else. So that's my impression so far as I can observe the situation, but I'm pretty sure that I'm ballpark correct.
Yeah. The other conflict is in the, as you mentioned, how ordinary people in Serbia would feel about the United States and the Western countries. We have the same feeling coming out of Africa, in Niger, in Chad. They're thinking the same way. How do you see the presence of Russia and China in Africa?
Went to attend a conference a few years ago in Germany, which was about Africa, and there was a number of delegations that gave us presentations about Chinese investment projects in Africa, right? And they were all speaking about these investments in very glowing terms. They were very happy about them, obviously. But then again, these were the people who were directly benefiting from those projects, right? So I thought, well, that's very interesting, but these people obviously would be biased in favor of these projects because they're the ones whose projects are being funded, or they're employed on those projects, or things like this. So I wasn't, I was intrigued, but I was a little bit skeptical. But I did, make it a point during the conference to speak to as many people from Africa there as I can, and to ask them, so how do you see all these things? And literally to a person, everybody gave me the same impression, meaning that they were very, very excited about this. And they said, we are probably the first generation of Africans who think that our children will be better off than we are. And then they kind of described to me the difference in the way that the Chinese treat them and the way the Westerners treat them. The Westerners come there with, very condescending, and they are kind of harsh in the way that they provide support. They will maybe sell them machinery or lease them the machinery, but if something breaks, they would charge it to them. Whereas they said, like, the Chinese, they send support, they send mechanics, they send people who teach us how to maintain the machinery. If anything breaks, they immediately are sending parts and instructors, and they treat us with respect. And they said that they can feel that they are finally growing more affluent, that they're becoming much better off. The most interesting thing that I heard was from a young man from Yemen. And so he told me about China building a large port in Yemen. And so the cost of this port was about $500 million, right? And so he said, you know what the deal is? The Chinese told us, we'll build you the port. You don't need to pay us anything for 20 years. With the port, your economy will develop, and in 20 years, you will be much more affluent, and then it'll not be difficult for you to pay us for building this port. But until then, you owe us nothing. So basically, the Chinese have apparently the approach of, we're going to help you develop your potential. We're going to make you more affluent, more wealthy. We're going to help you develop your economy. And then, when you can afford it, you're going to pay us back. I think that the strategy is that China is positioning itself as the global manufacturing hub. And so from that point of view, it is logical that they want affluent consumers everywhere around the world. So in the same way that they have lifted 800 or 850 million Chinese out of poverty, they maybe want to lift the bulk of the global South populations out of poverty, because they want affluent consumers to be buying their exports. So that makes sense. And that's a very sharp contrast with the Western policy, which has always been, for the past 200 years of colonialism, to deliberately keep commodity exporting powers, nations, impoverished, so that they never compete with the Western traders for the demand for the commodities that they export.
Yeah. It's so amazing the way you describe it, because when you look at BRICS and G7 right now, these two entities, these two organizations, and you see that before all this BRICS, when BRICS started, the West was thinking, oh, it's a joke and then they're not going to do anything. But it seems that BRICS is getting its momentum, is growing and growing so fast, and in the way that we see right now in Africa, in Europe, and in the Middle East. But let's focus for at the moment on Europe. Do you think that is that possible, Serbia or Hungary or any of these Eastern Europeans joining BRICS, in your opinion?
Yeah, of course it's possible, but I wouldn't venture to try to predict when that might happen. We'll have now BRICS coming under the presidency of Russia. We'll see. I think that my guess is as good as yours.
Yeah. And the other thing would be how much harm the United States together with Europeans can bring to BRICS. We have two empires fighting each other, G7 and BRICS. Do you think this fight gonna be peaceful in the future, or we gonna have a much bloodier war as we saw in Ukraine? It's gonna break out in Taiwan, in the Middle East right now. It's so complicated, this situation.
I tend to be quite optimistic, Nima, and the reason is because I can see that the leadership of BRICS nations, particularly Russia, Iran, and China, are very sophisticated, and they have clearly understood what they are up against. They're not falling into cheap provocations. They're not moonwalking into military conflicts that are needless, that can be solved in other ways. And I see that the West's maneuvering space is shrinking. It's getting tighter and tighter, and their ability even to field a military intervention is becoming very, very limited. We have literally the game-changing weapons weapons paradigm with the precision hypersonic missiles, because up until now, basically, the major force projecting lever of the Western powers, of the United States, have been the carrier strike groups, right? So they have these aircraft carrier groups with their F-16s, F-35s, whatever they carry on them, and wherever they send them around the world, they had a huge intimidating role, and no country wanted to become target of U.S. bombing campaigns. Well, a single Kinjal can cut an aircraft carrier in half and sink it immediately, and it's a precision hypersonic weapon. And so the aircraft carrier groups have suddenly become obsolete. And so the prospect of being visited by a U.S. fleet is no longer as intimidating as it has been for a few decades after World War II. And now we can see the direct effect of this, and that is that all of a sudden you have all these Western African countries simply throwing off the colonial oppression, disinviting the French and American troops, kicking them out. We have Houthis in Yemen who are no longer afraid to launch missile attacks on Western vessels, military or commercial. And we have a complete change in the architecture of alliances around the world. And we see that even the Western partners in how they're trying to counter this with AUKUS and with trying to expand NATO to include Japan and Singapore and Philippines, whoever they are dreaming about, it's just not working anymore. And so I think that what they're going to try to be doing is more regime changes, more coups, more assassinations. And so I don't know yet. I don't think that anybody knows yet whether the yesterday's helicopter crash that killed uh, Iranian President Raisi and the foreign minister, and then the recent assassination attempt on Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, whether that's part of it. But you know that's at any rate, the suspicion is founded because that has been the specialty of the Western powers. Regime changes and coups and assassinations, as they've done with Gaddafi and as they tried to do with Bashar al-Assad and other leaders. And then we also yesterday saw a botched coup in Congo. And it seems to me that unable to mount a real military intervention, they will try with their specialty, coups, assassinations, and maybe color revolutions, which is again why we have this conflict going on in Georgia to force the NGOs in Georgia to register as foreign agents. And so I think that the battle might not necessarily become a bloody, frontal World War III scenario, but I think that it will smolder on the margins like this, where Western powers try to influence another country by staging a coup or by attempting to assassinate leaders that are not to their liking, and so on. And that's probably going to take years. But at the same time, I think that all these other powers are growing a little bit wiser to these tactics, and are probably building their own defenses and resilience to these types of schemes.
Yeah. Alex, one of the things that was so surprising for the West, at least what we've seen so far in the mainstream media, was this new administration of Putin, in which he put an economist as the head of the Ministry of Defense. The New York Times reported that it's a new war weapon of Putin. And getting out of the Western rhetoric on what's going on in Russia, just thinking of what has happened and what is happening right now in Russia, how do you see what was the necessity of having an economist as the head of the Ministry of Defense in Russia when you look at it?
Here's what I think. Russia has invested a lot in the defense sector, but as we know, the defense sector ends up driving scientific and technological progress that subsequently has very interesting uses in the civilian sectors, in the consumer economy. And I think that the same is already becoming true in the Russian economy. And I think that the Russians are now keen to create their own version of America's Silicon Valley. Because remember, Silicon Valley was an initiative of the American defense sector. Okay. And then it's created this this incubator of new technology and new technological progress. I think that the new minister of defense in Russia is not only an economist, but he's kind of a specialist in project planning. He's a planner, and so I think that their intent with this is to try to make their defense spending benefit the whole rest of society, to make Russia a leader in new technologies and in innovation in a way that can make Russian consumer technologies leading edge in the world. I think that is the purpose, and I've even read some statements from Vladimir Putin and some other Russian leaders that kind of suggest this connection.
Yeah. We know that one of the main reasons for the economy of Germany being so powerful in the past 2-3 decades was this Russian energy going to Germany that was so cheap and was so affordable for Germany. And right now they're not having this anymore. And the United States is forcing them to pick a fight even with China right now. And when it comes to Europe and the situation of Europe, do you think that these leaders are finally waking up and saying, "Oh no, this is not in our benefit"? Macron is so unbelievably unpredictable. Sometimes he talks about China. In China, he says, "We're not the United States, we're not the vassals of the United States right now." Comes back, says another thing. And they're changing the rhetoric each and every time they're talking about China, Russia, and the United States. But at the end of the day, we know that Europe, without Russian gas, Russian energy, Russian having a common ground for their security with Russia, would not have a bright future. Do you think that at the end of the day, Europe would go totally in considering confrontation with Russia and China, or they gonna force the United States, or they still have some sort of leverage on the United States to bring them to some sort of sanity that it's not for the benefit of Europe to go after China and Russia and fighting them? Because if you are the United States and you want to fight Russia and China, you have to have powerful allies. But Europe is not powerful that much as it's used to be. And how do you see Europeans right now?
But I think that among the Europeans, there are many people who understand the situation, but there's not much that they can do about it, you know. So if you want to be in a leadership position, you have to go along and you have to give every indication that you are loyal, because if you're not loyal, then you're out. And the problem for Europe is that we have the NATO. The NATO is largely in control of European security apparatus. You know, the secret police. People who do bad things to people. You know, people who can kidnap your kids and assassinate, and the media as well, who can character assassinate people who don't go along. We can go back to just 2 years ago, a little bit more, when German admiral of the Navy, his name was Kai Akim Schonbach. He was at some kind of a defense summit in India, and the crisis in Ukraine was about to turn into a war, but it was already very tense there. So this was I think January 2022. And he made a statement there which said that the low cost solution to the Ukraine problem is to simply take Russian security concerns into account and to work with Russia and to treat them with respect, something to that effect. Well, that statement ended his career that day. He was out. And so you see, the problem is that people who are reasonable, who would entertain constructive solutions to problems and low-cost solutions, they're eliminated, while people who are mindlessly loyal to this, neo-colonial oligarchic hierarchy that's still in charge, they're promoted and they're empowered. The reason why I think that they ultimately lose is because, these are command and control hierarchies where maybe, the ideology is at the top of the pyramid, and then the people who are immediately below it are loyal people. But as you descend down to the rank and file, you need people who are capable, who are competent, and people who are competent, they understand the situation and they understand that we are on the road to nowhere. And so you don't have this compact, powerful force that's capable of engaging an enemy and being a worthy adversary. You have something quite wobbly, I think, that is indecisive, that cannot make up its mind, that's just kind of making it up as they go along. And then, as they do in Ukraine, the best they can do is from time to time, they can launch some attack on civilian targets in Russia, blow up a bridge, blow up a refinery, and that's it. But in the strategic sense, I think that they are incapable of mounting anything significant. And so I think it's only a matter of time before they are finally defeated.
Yeah. When it comes to BRICS, we know that we have everything. We have technology, we have energy, we have even Iran and Saudi Arabia talking to each other. Been after a long time, this animosity between these two countries has came to an end, and that shows the important role of Russia and China together to bring these two countries together, because Middle East is so important for them, for the future of energy, for what they're seeing, because China is a big engine that needs energy to run. And right now, China has Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, with literally everybody who has energy in the world.
Correct.
And do you think they are going to continue the delusional way that they have been since this conflict in Ukraine started, or they going to understand that the world is changing? Anthony Blinken once said, the world is changing and we have to study this new world, but it doesn't seem that the United States is prepared to do that.
It's very difficult to say, because there's clearly, there are people who understand the situation, and there are people who understand that we have to change something about our policies and about our strategy, because we are really on the road to perdition on the old continent. But then there are people who are close to the levers of powers who do not know anything else. There's a kind of a toxic groupthink among them, which cannot even conceive of a changing policy. And so I don't know how that ends, but there are people close to the military circles in France who actually believe that the most likely unraveling of the current impasse will be a civil war in France. And I know that many people in the United States think that there's going to be a civil war in the United States. Germany, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's rumblings of that too. There is going to be some kind of a clash between the rival political factions for control of our societies. And, a lot will depend on where the militaries will form, which is all very complicated, because we also have NATO, which is largely loyal to the United States. But then even the American, the American political world is very, very, very much divided. What happens if Donald Trump comes back to the White House? I think it's extremely difficult to predict how things are going to unravel. But, I hope that we're going to see leaders like Viktor Orban emerge in more countries, and that they will find ways to secure their mandates, rather than becoming victims of color revolutions or assassination attempts or real assassination. But I do believe that we have probably a decade or two of very volatile times ahead of us. It is my hope that constructive forces will prevail, and I do believe that diplomatic and other forms of support will be coming through from places like Russia and China, and that hopefully we will be able to make a transition to a different world in a relatively peaceful way without bloodshed.
Yeah, I think the Russian model of resisting the sanctions coming from the United States and Europe would be the future model for any country out there who is part of BRICS. And because when you look at Russia during this conflict, we had sanctions coming from even this Nord Stream pipeline and being sabotaged, and it was a huge surprise for Russia, I think, the sabotage of Nord Stream pipeline. When you look at the situation that we're witnessing so far in Russia, what was the main factor, the main reason that Russia could sustain this tremendous pressure coming from the West on them? And we had a major war that we haven't seen in the aftermath of the World War II. This is a real war. This is nothing like what we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, in any of these countries. This is a real war between Russia on one side and the United States and its allies on the other side. And they have sustained this war. Their economy is doing great right now. How Russia could manage that, in your opinion?
Okay, so I'm one of the people who expected actually Russia to be able to withstand the sanctions war from the West. And the reason, I had a bunch of arguments with my ex-colleagues at work. And, the reason why I thought so is, first of all, that Russians have largely resolved their debts to the Western nations. Second, Russia has a very low debt to GDP compared to Western nations. So I think that the global average is about 300% debt to GDP, maybe even more, maybe 350%. It's very, very high. I think that Russia, last I looked, they were at about 18%. So Russian public debt to Russia's GDP is only 18%. So they have a lot of maneuvering space to be able to keep the domestic credit impulse going without really unbalancing themselves economically and financially. Furthermore, Russia has worked very hard to make itself self-sufficient in production of food and in production of energy and key technologies that they need for their military industries. And so I felt that Russia was not very vulnerable to Western sanctions. I have to say that they have weathered the sanctions a lot better and with a lot more ease than I expected. But I was optimistic. I was even optimistic to begin with. And I thought that maybe even if they took a blow initially, that they would be able to recover from it relatively easily, and that they would not only survive but also ultimately thrived. The fact that they went practically unscathed is really a phenomenal thing to observe. My take is that it's basically they resolved their debt to the Western financial institutions. It's remained nominal. They have low debt to GDP, so they're not very. It wouldn't be very easy to destabilize Russian economy through debt overhangs, and then as I said, they're self-sufficient in all the strategic industries and commodity production.
How the BRICS countries managed to help Russia during this conflict? They had an important role in this battle between Russia and the West, or they were on the margins of this battle?
No, I think they played a very important role, because if you remember in 2014, when in the aftermath of the coup in Kiev, the American side arranged with the Saudis a collapse in oil prices. The oil prices in 2013, 2014, they were above $100 a barrel. And then they crashed them by something like 75%. The oil went below $40 a barrel, and that was in 2014, and that trend continued through 2015. And Saudi Arabia had a very important role in that, and there was a lot of talk in the financial media about Saudi production, that they were planning to go to 15 million barrels a day and all these things. It didn't amount to very much, but it did create this idea of a massive oil glut in the world market, which helped bring the oil prices down, which was intended to be a blow to the Russian economy. And then, at that time, the ruble started to collapse, and the Russian central bank started to defend the course of the ruble, the exchange rate of the ruble, but they were stopped. Apparently Vladimir Putin called Nabulina, told her to not defend the ruble. Today, the fast forward 10 years, and today, the BRICS nations have not gone on board with any kind of a trade war against Russia. Particularly, the Saudis haven't done the same as they've done in 2014, and China and India and other nations have declined to participate in sanctions against Russia. And that's the part that, when we were talking earlier about why Russia hesitated to intervene in Ukraine in 2014, and they felt more confident in 2022. I think that part of that is that they had prepared that terrain, that they have developed those relationships with India, with Saudi Arabia, with other nations, to make sure that, when the West hits them with these sanctions, that they have partners around the world that will continue to cooperate with them.